diversity and inclusion. The other side of the coin being, law and order, um, pro police sentiments, being, or what some people believe, being a black conservative. Those things can seem counter to each other. But I'm interviewing today. We're going to interview Pamela Denise Long. Goes by Denise, so don't call her anything. I'll call her Denise. And she somehow believes in all of these things. There's more. There's more, and we're going to let her kind of get into exactly what it is she believes, because I think it's important when it comes to conversations of race, conversations of pushing American culture forward, conversations of improving race relations and the situation for Black Americans in America specifically, but also even in a global sense. I think we do need to address these things. And Pamela Denise Long has been working in fields such as DEI and being a political commentator, would label herself a Black conservative, but is also pro-Black, which is such a contradiction if you really think about it. So welcome to Costly Conversations podcast, a podcast where we talk about all sorts of social issues, and we are extremely pro 2A. So kind of keep that in the back of your head. We will be discussing that right now. Denise, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. We finally got a chance to catch up, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm extremely excited. I think this is one of those topics that you can easily talk about just one-on-one with a friend who's kind of open to ideas, but in the global, zeitgeist and conversations on the internet, a lot of the things that we spoken about last time we talked, which is like, hey, how can we push the conversation forward for, Black people as a whole? How can we push American politics forward? How can we, what is the history of Black Americans and how does that relate to everything else? I've been reading a couple of books that have kind of like got my wheels spinning, and based on some of the things that you've been working on in the past few weeks and months, and even in the last 20 years of your career, I feel like you're a great person to talk to when it comes to really just kind of parsing through a lot of the noise and actually dealing with stuff. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to it. Solutions is where it's at.
Yeah. Now, and that is kind of the thing is I feel like, and maybe this is more than a feeling, this is somewhat fact, is I don't know that there's a lot of money in the solutions. Yeah. When it like, that's my mindset, where it's like, well, why haven't we kind of come to a point where we're like, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to solve some of the issues and then keep the conversation moving in a forward trajectory, if I can use English today. So I guess we talked a little bit about what you believe in. I guess if you could kind of give the audience, the listening audience, the guys and gals who are live with us today, if you guys have questions, please drop them in the chat. Let us know where you're listening from, but of course, feel free to jump in there and, ask. But could you kind of explain like who you are and what do you do? If they look you up, obviously they'll see that you've done some writing, you've featured on a couple interviews. Well, what else? What is there to you?
Yeah, so I'm a Mississippi girl, born and raised between there and certain parts of the Chicago area. Um, seventh gen American on both sides of my family. I can trace us back to the 1800s. Um, I am politically, I show up as independent, which for me means that the rhetoric, the solutions, the problem framing that seems most correct to me and historically contextualized, historically accurate, historically nuanced, and is focused on solutions is the thing that I go for. So I'm not a hard party line kind of voter or supporter, which is why, to your point, to your introduction, I think sometimes I confuse people about who I am and what it means, because they're used to people towing a party line, and I don't do that. I'm a dog mom, I'm a human mom, a mom of a human. And my whole focus and how I show up in my career and in the other ways is about challenging the common narrative and pushing for solutions oriented actions and conversations that really get at what does any of this mean and what are we going to do about it. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I'm a black conservative. I don't This is a struggle that I've had since I became an official member of the Republican Party. Is I don't know what that conservatism means the same thing to white folk and black folk in particular. I would say I'm more of a Lincoln style Republican,
Mm.
in the true sense of the word, which is not just that he was all about, you know, the American Freedmen, the Republican Party of that time, but also because he was about uniting the country and doing the hard work of the unpopular thing that is needed to be done to move the country forward as a United States. And I appreciated the fact that he was of necessity to preserve the Union. He needed to actually lean into what it meant to not just emancipate our ancestors, but to also deliver equity to them and how that advances the country. And I still am of that mindset today from the DEIA being anti-racism perspective, is that America needs a Lincoln-esque leader who is willing to do the unpopular thing because it's the necessary thing for the nation.
You know, I can appreciate that just as somebody who also, and I don't know if you've been watching the show for a while, maybe some things that I've said have contradicted, and just the kind of popular rhetoric, such as like, yeah, I'm kind of with the, when I say kind of, anti-racism thing, but I don't really get excited about people using terms such as microaggressions. I think it's
Mm,
such a played out Zennial term
mm.
that it's like, okay, it's the thing that all the kids are saying. You think you're cool just because you know how to say microaggression? Like, show me something real and we'll talk about it. Like, did you lose that promotion even though you are more qualified just
Mm.
because the other guy knows how to play golf and you don't play golf because that's just something you didn't grow up playing? Not to say that you can't learn, but and that begs the question: is it a cultural thing or is it a race thing? And sometimes it's both, and sometimes it's neither. But I'm
Yeah,
sure
they're
you have
definitely
thoughts.
intertwined. They're definitely intertwined. I mean, you mentioned golf, for example. First of all, I love golf. I'm not a golfer. I play at golf,
Mhm.
and I enjoy playing at it. And it plays me sometimes, to be quite honest. But that's part of the beauty of the game, I think, is like sometimes you're on it, and then sometimes you're very much not. So, but you mentioned a thing there, how cultural practices such as golfing or football or baseball or hockey or any of those types of cultural pastimes create an opportunity for you to build social networks and relationships with people. And some of those types of uh, cultural practices are more practiced by people who are in the higher echelons, if you will, who have more resources to afford those things, but also because those traditions are passed down from family to family. So they kind of go together. And often those families with more resources for that type of activity are generally white. So that's an example of how race and culture kind of are intermingled in a way that it's hard to disentangle. You mentioned microaggressions and some of the nomenclature of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. I get the concept of the microaggression and how those are real, in that they're basically the sort of, I'm going to use the word insensitive just for want of another word, but some insensitive, unnuanced. How about that? Statements that are lacking nuance around race and history and all of those types of things, that when they're stated or when those behaviors are done, can have a psychological impact, or even a real impact, measurable outcome impact on the people who are the targets of them. And so, I mean, I'm sure you can think of some times where you've been in a situation where somebody's talking about race of Black people and what we need to do, that the way they say it comes off as arrogant, it comes off as condescending,
Oh yeah.
it comes off as you talking, but you ain't studied no history. You are
Right.
repeating stuff that you've heard, right? Is that a microaggression? Is that significant? Should we be somewhat immune to words? And that's the question. That's part of the question in the free speech, free expression, DEI sort of tension that was part of the MIT debate that I did earlier this month is, should people be able to say what they want to say, not just from a First Amendment perspective, but from the perspective of, should the listeners be open to tolerating and hearing any speech that a person has to say?
Yeah, it is really interesting. I mean, if you look back in the last 2 weeks, floating around the internet, you actually have instances of what looks like pretty blatant racism. Like somebody called this girl the N word just in the grocery store, and then she got beat up, and a strong portion of the internet was like, I'm okay with that. For
Oh,
me, I'm just like, I hate to see violence for violence sake. I'm not necessarily against somebody getting a comeuppance every once in a while. Like you can't just go around saying words, like whether it's calling someone the B word, an Adam Henry, the N word. Like you can't just call people names and get away with it, especially names that have very strong historical backing. Like, not to say that you might not get away with it, because you might, but every once in a while you're going to run into somebody who's just not in the mood, and they're going to smack you in the face. Maybe to take a tooth and go home with it. Like, it could happen.
not
And
the
right. And I'm just like, well, it
yeah.
happened. I'm not calling the police and reporting this chick, like whatever, you know. But also try not to report, assault, you know. Like,
Yeah.
don't try not to record yourself assaulting somebody. Like, it's not a good idea.
Yeah, it's that, now that's definitely advisable right there, is not to record yourself doing stuff like that. Yeah, I remember that video. Now that you mention it, she's
Hmm.
the one who even invited the person she'd insulted to do something about it, and then the person she insulted did something about it. Yeah, I don't know what people are thinking
I'm not
with
sure.
those types of verbal attacks and the
Right, the
invitation.
the blatant ones, like, because I
Yeah,
know we were talking about some like subtle stuff, like,
sure,
oh
yeah,
well, I mean, the reality is, 13% of the population is committing 50% of the, quoting like statistics that really don't have full context, and even if they are fully contextualized, like, there's no compassion or desire to help the people that they're talking about. It's just
yeah.
looking down, like clearly, obviously
Right.
looking down. And I'm not trying to judge people's intentions, but it seems pretty clear. You don't have to be a genius, you know.
Yeah, and you don't have to be sold out on, like, you don't have to be woke, as liberals and
Right.
conservatives like to talk about it nowadays in a bastardized way, but just to notice that what you are doing and what you're talking about is not solutions oriented. You are simply arguing for the sake of feeling superior, stoking the political conversation, selling to your political camp. You're not trying to focus on solutions. And I think conversations like that, and I get a lot of that kind of trolling on my Twitter page,
Oh, I
conversations,
bet.
they aren't designed to move us forward. They're simply designed to feel like the person who's saying that stuff is winning.
Hmm.
And why bother with that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is weird, especially. I mean, man. Sometimes I wonder, like, if people could really. I say it like this. I was having a conversation with my cameraman and his wife, and we were talking about online discourse, the good side and the bad side. The good side being like, hey, like, if you ever see a really funny video that's just like pure enjoyment, go to the comment section, because it only gets funnier. There's like
Right.
some straight up comedians who never got their shot
Or
in the
real.
comment, and it's just so much funnier, right? But
Oh God.
also, On the other side, if you ever see a video of like some kids from the hood, it doesn't even matter if they're white or black. It's going to be assumed that they are black. And people are
Mm,
going to be like, well, this and this and this. And they're like, this is what diversity and inclusion gets us. And it's like, oh
right,
my God, like I can't deal with this. Like,
right.
take me off the internet. I'm done. You know?
Yeah, and I think we need to let those comments die on the vine.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I approach, sometimes I ignore people. Sometimes I don't even get notices that people have commented on stuff when they comment a certain way. Somehow Twitter
Right.
just filters that stuff out from my awareness, which is beautiful and great. And then sometimes I engage with it depending on the point that I want to make for the next person who scrolls through and sees the exchange. So it's not even
Mm-hmm.
always about the person, the troll, that I'm engaging with and what they said. It's about laying something down for the other people who will see what has been said. And the great thing about how Twitter has changed is that now everybody can see how many impressions or how many views a tweet has had.
Right. Whether it
So
gets
there
likes or shares or not.
Absolutely, yes. And so what that has taught me is that, and what is made clear, is that more people see what is put out there than ever engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important, I think, to nuance, challenge, educate, rather than carry on these long, extended exchanges just for the purpose of it. But if it's going to
Mm-hmm.
serve a political purpose, counter messaging, then I'll do it. But then a lot of times, other people who are connected will do it instead of me having to engage, which I also like.
It is nice to know that there are people out there who they're not just going to cape for you necessarily, but they will say and do, I suppose, the right thing, quote unquote. Like they'll jump in and say, like, "Hey, listen, you're being a jerk. This is factually incorrect. You think you're pulling this a document here? That's nonsense. It's already been debunked 10 years ago. This is a report from the 1950s. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
How did you pass college? Did you even go? No. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
You're being classist when you say that. No, no, but there are people who will just, it's like community fact checking, right? They
Mm-hmm.
will step in and they will handle the thing. And again, sometimes I don't even see the negative thing that they're addressing, but I do sometimes get notice of what they said. And somehow
Mm-hmm.
Twitter filters it the proper way sometimes. But yeah, so that's important to do. We need that too.
Yeah, I do want to talk about a little bit of, I know you said you've worked in DEI for a long time. You've written this and you've written that. Um, what is, maybe I've asked this in so many words, but what is DEI to you, and how do you reconcile what it kind of means to, I guess, the rest of conservative culture, Republican culture, being that you do somewhat identify with conservative
Mm.
Republicanism or whatever that means to you. It's such vast words that we're using to try to describe things, and we're trying not to sound kooky while doing it. Yeah.
That's the challenge, right?
All right.
So how do I find it? Diversity is the presence of difference, whatever that difference might be. Equity, for me, is receipt of benefit from investment in a thing, just like you have equity in your home. And it is fairness within that. Inclusion is making sure that the presence of difference, diversity, is heard from, is considered, and listened to, right? And then I always add anti-racism to that because I think it's a different level of nuance from DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And when I speak about anti-racism, I'm talking about people having and developing and having the capacity to see within themselves when they are being racially unfair and or biased, and also those people having the capacity to disrupt the bias and racial unfairness that they see happening around them. That's at the within a person level, that's in relationships, that's between groups, that's also at the societal level, and it's also at the organizational level, and the systems that people move in and function in. So,
Yeah. So with that, how do you say that you are involved in that process? Like, what exactly do you do when you're in DEI, or are you going to organizations and teaching a course? Because I've seen some grifters get real upset that DEI is down. When I say grifters, I imagine that they're good, honest brokers of information and trying to just make the world a bit of a better place. I sound sarcastic. Am I being? Maybe, maybe not. No one can ever tell. My wife is very upset at the fact that my voice gets weird and no one knows what I'm talking about. So, like, how does that play out for you? Like, do you go to companies and are you going to Starbucks and saying like, hey, listen, like you had an incident last week, I can help you?
Sometimes. And then sometimes people reach out to me. So what I do through Youth Centrics is, which is a company, my work in DEIA shows up in a couple ways. Training and consulting. We have a process called Humane Anti-Racism, which is where that's online learning, reflection with some other activities baked into it. And there's weekly group coaching where I meet with the group that's going through that cohort of training, and I help them process the race related things, particularly related to Black folk, that they are experiencing, as well as reflecting about the content that they covered in the modules for that week. I do trainings about trauma informed care, which is really understanding how toxic stress, which is stress that overwhelms a person, and trauma, which is adversity that overwhelms the ability to cope, how that affects people psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and just developmentally overall, and how that trauma and toxic stress negatively affect performance. But then part of that is also talking about how do we heal that? How do we create relationships and environments that help people move past their trauma responses and create environments that are not activating people's stress response system, that you probably heard fight, flight, freeze, but
Mm-hmm.
also fawn is a part of that, where people charm or submit to the aggressor in a particular situation or the perceived threat. So, and the other part of that is I write white papers. Organizations reach out to me to do things like that, like white papers for their org, depending on what they're talking about. But it's all related to how to infuse diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism from a solutions-based perspective into whatever it is they're doing, whether it's political, whether it's academic, um, whether it's organizational, that kind of thing.
So, I mean, we've seen a lot of, I guess, DEI type stuff recently, especially when you talk about what is it that is a famous buzzword about the schools, and they're teaching kids that
Critical race.
critical race theory, and the idea that is thrown around, especially if you listen to it from a Republican slash conservative point of view, is they're teaching the good white children that they are former slave owners and they're bad and they should feel bad for what they did to those poor little Black kids who are just trying to get ahead. You know.
That's interesting because so I did a video for the company called "Is Critical Race Theory Racist Through the Trauma Lens," and kind of clarified to people what CRT is aiming to do. And the origins of it. And so I do not believe that critical race theory is racist. It would be like saying calling out the ways racism has harmed is racist to call it out. I do, however, having been in this training space for a while, I have seen some really counterproductive ways that people talk about race and racism in a corporate organizational setting where it alienates more than it calls people in. And so, like, one of the training organizations out there has white people sign a contract that says all white people are racist and I'm no exception. Why do that? It creates a sort of guilt that is not useful to me. And I tell white people when I work with them, your guilt and your shame is not useful to me, nor is it
Right.
useful. So what we're really looking at is recognizing the beauty and the horror of American history and accepting it for what it is, and realizing that has been bequeathed to us. It is our legacy now. It is our time now. So what are we going to do with our inheritance of this place, this space, and this beauty and the horror that come with it together? How do we own that? And how are we going to use our power, our presence, our voice to make things better and or different? And so that's sort of my approach. Much of what I do is relationships based, because I think, in my experience, many white people are scared to really talk about race and haven't truly reflected on it in a critical way, where they're actually consuming new information, where they're actually talking with Black people who are going to be honest with them um, about even how they show up. And so part of what I do is I am that honest person, and I tell people I'm not going to coddle you. And I don't think your Black friends have been honest with you, and I'm going to be really honest with you about the things, and I'm going to demand of you a level of self-ownership, where you're not going to ask me to chew it all for you and to mouth feed it to you. I'm going to need you to do your due diligence with the things that we talk about. And I think all Black people should do that. I think we should stop coddling white people. And I think in a way we do. In a way we insult them, right? Because we sick of it and tired. But there's ways that part of white culture is to debate everything, and including our legacy and all those kinds of things. And I don't think that every Black person needs to feel compelled to be that debate partner. But for those of us who are at a stage of healing and or other whatever, who are willing to do that in the ways that don't overburden us, I think we should engage in those debates if and when you can. But it's not your job to do that.
In what way would you say that you've noticed? Because you said something that's pretty poignant or clear in my mind. Like you say, Black people coddle their white friends, and I would love for us to try to, not that you're doing this, and maybe you have, maybe you haven't, instead of just saying like these are ethereal things. Like
Mm,
example, in what
mm.
way would you say Black people are coddling their white friends? Go.
Okay, so without disclosing any names, I had an
Sure.
exchange this morning from a colleague who shared something with me. I read through it. They wanted my input about it. I shared my input about it. And we had a sort of back and forth exchange via email. And eventually, this person gave me the tropes about the Black American community, which is, Roosevelt. Roosevelt's policies destroyed the Black family, welfare destroyed the Black family, all the things, right? And I was really honest. I was like, that is simplistic uh, and erroneous and offensive trope. And here's what really happened. The problem is that no program has harmed Black Americans. It's the administrators of those programs and the framing of those programs. It's the white administrators of those programs and the framing of those programs. For example, and I went on to mention how white people have benefited from numerous handouts from the federal government, gave the examples of those, but they point their finger at Black Americans, while white Americans have been the largest beneficiaries of the government teat. And I mean, these are actual words that I said in that exchange. And so you have to know who you're talking to, right? But this person is someone who loves debate. And so I wasn't willing to go through like 10 layers of like setting it up just right to figure out how to say, no, I'm just going to tell you the thing. And so that's an example for me of being really clear. And even at the same time, while I was saying these very clear points in history and calling white folks out, and this person in particular, is I was doing it in a collegial way. So I was still like, thank you for, sharing what you shared with me and all of the things. So that's kind of an example of what I mean. And I think also, like, when white folks say stuff in a way that, how Black people, your radar goes off, like you hear a certain word or a certain tone or how something is said, we will mentally note it, but we may not call people on it. We'll just note it. And then if it's said more than enough, we just stop talking to you. So I think one of the other things we could do is to let people know the impact that they're having. Chris, you said da 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 da. Can you tell me more about what you meant there? Right? And helping people see how what they're saying impacts us and how it can translate in a way that makes us not want to continue to be in relationship with them.
Yeah, I knew a guy, and I can actually attest to that. I knew a guy who, I guess he was adopted, and he was adopted into a family with a bunch of black kids already in it, and I guess he felt entitled to not like any like hardcore black joke, but like
Mm,
little ribs and digs, and we didn't really have that kind of relationship. Like we were cool, and
mm.
we were like forming a relationship, but eventually I got to a point where just like, uh, and then there was other like character issues. I'm just like, I don't really feel like dealing with it. You know,
So did you
I'm,
did you disappear or did you
yeah,
tell the person?
just kind of like
Yeah,
phased out. Like we could have been friends to this day, but it's just
yeah,
kind of like, whatever. You're not that
yeah.
cool, anyways.
Well,
Like,
that's something that it's part of that is self-preservation, right? And I think part
yeah,
of it is, do I want to be bothered with this? Do I want to be bothered with, for some people, particularly white women, the tears? And I have learned to really be silent when people are crying. I'm not gonna console you necessarily. Um, I will give you the time you need to collect yourself so that we can continue to engage. That's another thing we do is we're so
what are
much
these tears coming from? Let me just.
usually white women who like are their cry about, we're friends and I can't believe you would ever think I would like all of that. I would do this and I would say this and how can you say this to me? All of those types of things. I've just learned to let people manage their own emotions, and I'll offer to give them time and say and offer to pause the conversation to come back to the conversation in the future. Um, but really to let people own their own emotional psychological processes. So what I would like to see is that, disappear if you must, because I get it. And at the same time, invite people into a better way of relating to you. I've really enjoyed the thing we have in common with such and such and the times we've spent together. There are some ways, though, that you talk about Black Americans that really hit me in a way that makes me question if we're seeing things the same way. I'd love to
Mm,
have a conversation with you about that. Can we do that now, or do you need some time to reflect? And because the whole point for me is to make sure we're relating to each other in a mutually respectful way that is worthy of both of us, right? So
yeah,
getting people to own how they show up, but we will disappear on you for sure.
yeah. That's correct. I know last time we talked about DEI and problem
Mm,
solving and such things, we talked about a word, effective outcomes. What
mm.
does that mean in the context of these things?
So people, the anti-affirmative action and the colorblind crowd wants to
Right.
say,
Because
wants to say,
there is this. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is this really big group of people, and sometimes I find myself on the list who thinks like affirmative action really isn't as effective as it
mm,
should be in a lot of ways, and it leaves a lot of people questioning, I guess, their place in the world. Like I know a girl who got into a doctoral program, and she's like, this is kind of a big deal. Am I on this list for these people who is a very elite select list of people because of
mm,
affirmative action, or is it because I'm just top of my game,
mm,
earned it every single day? And she did. Like first of all, she did. Like she
mhm,
sweated it out. Like when everybody
mm.
else was hanging out, chilling, staying at the birthday party 10 minutes longer, she was like, "Got to go to the library because I got to work harder than everybody else. I'm not that smart." Well, she's a genius, but she's humble.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
keep going. I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate that story. And so, great. Here's my thought. If you are a multi-generational Black American, that to me is significant merit in decision making about if you get a scholarship, if you get a job, if you get an academic placement. So I am pro affirmative action for American Negroes, 100,000%. I'm even pro lineage based set asides for American Negroes, separate from any other category. Um, I
I think
have,
it's I think it's interesting that you said that because it's been said that white women have been a huge benefactor of
All the
affirmative
time.
action, which is crazy to me because I'm like, why?
Well, because they're white. I mean, it's brilliant for white men who are making decisions of law at that time to add their mothers and daughters to become minorities. I mean, it's a great way to build more wealth in your own family, right? That's not to say there aren't things that women largely have had to experience being considered basically subordinate to their husbands, and at the same time, to put white women in the same category, a minority category, as the descendants of US slaves is a gross miscarriage of justice. So while, yes, white women have been the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action, they've also been the primary destroyers, if you will, of it. So I'm pro affirmative action on a lineage based perspective. I am pro set aside specifically to Negroes that no one else, and I literally mean nobody, because people like to slap Native Americans with us for some reason. Nobody else gets a part of that action, and no one should be ashamed of being an affirmative action hire. Do we shame people for accepting apologies? Do we shame people for accepting reparatory efforts in relationship? Why would we ever shame Negroes for accepting the apology and reparatory efforts from our government and its institutions?
You know, that is actually a really interesting point, and I don't want to seem like we're just agreeing with each other this whole time because
If we do, it works.
what fun is that? But you're right. But the idea is, if you sued Amazon for spying on you with the I'm going to trigger everybody's Alexa at home.
Wow.
Like if you sued them for doing this and this and that, and literally you were thinking about soap, and all of a sudden you're getting ads for soap. I'm literally about to get a billion ads for soap. Thanks, guys. And you won, say, a settlement of like $1.3 million for emotional distress and damages.
Yeah.
Things that
Oh,
people get paid for. No
mhm.
one's gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, look at you off on the Amazon teat,
Right.
just living large on the hog," because
Playing the victim.
and playing the victim, things like that. And I'm like, oh, no one gets mad about that. No one gets mad when you go against Goliath and get your pound of flesh. But yet it seems like every time this conversation comes up, and even as somebody who, if you are listening this far and you don't know, like if you've been paying attention, you don't know, I'm like super pro Second Amendment, like
Absolutely.
pretty socially conservative. I'm definitely for the advancement of Black people and making sure that we are educated in this field because it's super important. Like it's hard to oppress minorities if you're armed. Armed minorities are harder to oppress. It's just
Hmm.
simple as that. Like, why did the original gun laws come out?
Right.
To make sure that Black Americans and even Native Americans, we can include them in that conversation, are not able to defend themselves against tyranny. Yeah, tyranny. That's the word. I'm going to use that word.
In there too.
And so there's that, and I am constantly wondering, like, why don't people, and kind of going back to what we were talking about, why don't people get mad when you win a big settlement against a corporation, but yet even the idea that America in some way, shape, or form should be sued significantly, that's pretty much what it is. It's like a lawsuit in my mind. It should have a lawsuit levied against it for the crimes. What was that?
Lawsuits, plural.
Well, I mean, there should be multiple because there's different phases. It's not just like, oh, the slavery phase. I mean, there's stuff that happened up into the '60s and beyond. Really, like if you want to get super serious, like there's some stuff that happened like not even 40 years ago at this point. We're in 2023 as of recording, and somebody might say there's stuff that happened recently, more recently than that. But I think the some of the things that are like super obvious, happened in some previous decades. I'm sure you can tell me about some things that happened more recently.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
said, lawsuits, I have no problem with that. Get what's yours. The Native
Yeah.
Americans have not the perfect system because I think it in some ways has damaged them. I'm not exactly sure what it caused some of the issues that the Native American population has, but they at least got something that is theirs. What was
Lots,
given to American freedmen
billions of dollars, billions of dollars, billions of
with a
dollars.
B.
with a B every year and
Mm.
not having to pay taxes and having set asides that other people don't compete with,
Taxation
unlike
is theft.
yeah. So I think to your point about why do people support, folks getting restitution for certain things, but not for, well, just about everything except for American Freedmen. I think, gosh, many things. I think for some people, it's a knee jerk reaction. The idea of reparations for slavery, nobody's alive as a slave today, and you've never met a slave, like all the tropes that all these people use. And they don't apply that venom to the Native Americans. They don't apply that venom to Jews or European Jews with the Holocaust. It is specifically toward Negroes. And I think maybe some of that is, again, knee jerk reaction. Some of that is white guilt, where if we don't acknowledge it, it's not real. I think some of that is envy. The idea of us being repaired and not be the bottom rung, bottom caste, as people like to say, in the United States economically, I think shatters some people's framework of social order in America. I think some people are quite comfortable with Negroes being disenfranchised and can't imagine a national narrative milieu culture where we're not broke, poor, and powerless.
You know what? I'll tell you what, and this is maybe going to be offensive to some people, maybe even yourself. If depends on how sensitive you are, so don't be too
Bring
sensitive.
it on,
Okay.
bring it on.
So this happened recently, about a weekend ago, week and a half ago. What was it, last weekend actually? I went to one of my wife's best friend's wedding. She's a descendant of first generation from Cameroon, Africa, and her husband Tanzanian. Med school kids, scientists. Her parents are a lawyer and a doctor, and not a doctor, a scientist. Excuse me.
Mhm.
Studying the brain and such.
Yeah.
So clearly, like, no matter who you are, like if you come from parents who are doing big things, you're going to have some sort of framework for how big you think you can go, your vision for the world, your drive and motivation. And obviously there are exceptions, those who fall off, and I'm sure there'll be some study that says, fifth generation people from Africa don't do as well as first and second and third,
Right.
stuff like that. But going to that wedding, and every other person you talk to is either a doctor or lawyer, some sort of scientist, some sort of, higher education administrator,
Mhm.
something worth doing. When I
Mhm.
say worth doing, something that's paying you six figures, in multiple six figures,
Gotcha.
something that is beyond respectable. Like, and nobody there working at McDonald's. I'm not trying to shame anyone who works at McDonald's. I'm just saying, like,
I get your point. You're talking about class and whatnot. Yeah.
right. And it's like, whoa, I wish, and maybe I don't run into the right black circles. I wish I could go into somebody's family function and only find doctors, lawyers, scientists. Like, that would just be insane. And just, there is a level of opulence. And I'm not talking about just like, ooh, it's a wedding, right? But there's just a level of just like you walk in and everybody's just happy to be there. And I'm not saying nobody's loud, because there's people there who are being loud and boisterous and very African. We're cheering and it sounds like it don't. This is going to be embarrassing to say. Like, please don't clip this. I almost felt like I was transported into like Wakanda. Like, it was just so. I'm gonna get in trouble for that. It was just like, it felt like something I've never seen before. And I've been in
Mm-hmm.
some cool rooms,
Mm-hmm.
but to know like literally everybody around me is just like not only doing well, but doing excellent. Like, how's business? Booming. Like, it's great. So I don't know. Like, I don't even know if I have anywhere I'm going with that, but I just wish that for every room that I walk in.
Well, I can tell you. So, when you were talking about the list of professions and stuff, and what you're specifically mentioning there really is the resources and connections
Yes.
that are baked into that. I was thinking about the different sides of my family, and I mean, there are some sides in my family where literally, like at a family function, you have all those things: doctors, lawyers, pilots, professors, 9 out of 10
Mm-hmm.
nurses, business owners of various sorts who are
Right.
doing
Right.
really well. And then in other parts, particularly those who remained in the South, you don't see that.
Yeah,
And I think there's a way that, to your point about them being African, to your point, there's a way that folks who come from the continent and other places are already well appointed, already well situated in their homeland.
that's
And
right. People don't talk about that.
they bring their, right, because everybody who come here is broke. I have no idea where they live, right? Like, how is that possible? How do they feed themselves? Anyway, there are ways they're already well appointed in their homeland and they come here from that position of resource. I don't want to call it privilege, from resource, and they step into this nation that our ancestors have made great from a human rights perspective, and they don't have the same psychological burdens. And they think that we have the problem for being perceptive enough to notice how history is not over for us and what we've been through. There are ways that it still manifests today, and they brush some of those things off. And at the same time, they do have privilege in not being an American Negro. And there are ways that, from what my white friends who move in higher circles like that tell me, there are ways that those people, those Black immigrants, come into white spaces and deride Black Americans while they have never been through what we've been through, and they come from very resourced environments in the first place. So there are some complexities to that uh, that I think need to be noted. And I think part of the tensions of what people are calling not culture wars, what is diaspora wars, I think is how it's been framed.
Yeah,
People are
I've been
calling
seeing
that
some of
out.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people are calling that out now, and rightly so. If you haven't been through the thing, you're coming from an outside perspective, already resourced, and you're getting privilege because you're not one of us, right? I think Robin DiAngelo speaks about this, how she noticed in herself that she tended to favor Black immigrants over Black Americans because there wasn't that inherent tension in our relationship about how Robin is a white woman benefited from her whiteness, um, but between her and an African immigrant, but with a Black American, that tension is inherently there.
Okay. Now we are going to take 1 second and just promote some things. Guys, if you have made it this far, one of the greatest things you can do to support the show, and not just support it, but make sure that we can kind of keep this thing going into the future, have more guests on that are kind of pushing the conversation forward, bringing new and interesting ideas, but also supporting what we support, and even if they don't, bringing interesting ideas. The best thing you can do is to join us on Patreon, patreon.com/Armed Atlas. It is an interesting community. We have a private Discord server where you can hop in and share some ideas, early access to certain exclusive content, early access to some of the firearms content that we do on the Armed Atlas YouTube side. So if you are interested in making sure we can have more awesome guests like Pamela, Denise Long, and even maybe some in-person stuff in the future, because we need a budget for that, hop over there, check us out, see if that's something that you are interested in supporting, whether it be for a certain amount of time or into perpetual support. It doesn't matter. I just want to let you know how to support. That said, also I do want to let you guys know, once you've done that, and once you've checked that out, check out Denise's Twitter feed. I think you'll be more than happy with some of the discussions and dialogues that are happening. The link should be down below, and if it's not, we're going to make sure we ask her at the end of the show to make sure that we can get that for you guys. And now
Awesome.
on to the show. Hey, thank you for waiting on us. That said, hey, I want to talk about firearms because, if we get through the whole episode of talking about it, the guys who tap in for the firearms discussions are going to be upset.
Let's talk
So
about it.
let's talk about that. Where are you when it comes to the gun conversation, gun debate? And what is your level of firearms experience? And you can say zero if you're not super adept.
So I am pro 2A. I believe that one of the things, as the framers conceptualized, one of the things that keeps a free people free and safe relatively speaking, is the right to bear arms. Um, I believe that firearm safety is important within that conversation. People need to know how to store weapons, how to clean, care for weapons, and um, really reflect on and appreciate the extent to which those who are in their household and otherwise have access to those weapons, if their state of mind, mental health, and well being makes them a danger to themselves or others. And the gun owners need to be vigilant about doing what they can to prevent collateral damage because of someone's mental health concerns, but also other concerns that might make them lean toward violence as a solution to whatever they're feeling. I don't generally talk about my firearm experience or possession. I will say that I grew up shooting a long gun. I mean, as a kid, it was always loaded under the bed. And when my granny saw some stranger coming down our driveway, she would have us grab it for her and load it if need be. So that's how we rolled with that. I can appreciate and know how to use a pistol. Don't deal with revolvers too much. Glocks are amazing. And I think that every gun owner should, and this should be really, really adept at maintaining a weapon in the like dressing it down, putting it back together, clearing it, all of those really things, because I think a lot of people own the gun, but they're really not, I don't know what the word will be, proficient
Hmm.
perhaps with,
Proficient is a word that I would use. Yeah.
yeah, with, I don't know, management. I think firearm management and firearm ownership are different things, where ownership is just like the beginning of it, but like getting
Hmm.
deeper into the knowledge is a whole nother thing.
Yeah, I actually really agree, and it's unfortunate because I've been having conversations more recently, kind of talking about um, what it looks like. Like we had Hold My Guns, which is an organization that if you are personally feeling unwell or you need to have your gun stored for any reason, even outside of mental health issues, you can go to certain FFLs that are partners with Hold My Guns, pay like $20 a month or something really low, and
That's,
have either essential components of the firearm stored or
yeah,
the entire firearm stored, which I think is fantastic if you are kind of sensing that, hey, I'm
right.
personally dealing with thoughts and feelings that are not normal for me, which it's hardly recognizable that they're your own.
Mm,
Maybe you can take some steps or suggest it for a friend, or maybe you don't even use the service, but you realize because something like this exists that you are not alone, that there are people
mm,
out there who care about you. Maybe there's people out there who are dealing with the same thing you're dealing with. And I
yeah,
think organizations like them, like Walk the Talk America, which is another pro Second Amendment organization that has mental health surveys, and they partner with different gun manufacturers to put mental health surveys in the box just for people who maybe they buy a gun, maybe they're having dark thoughts and they're willing
mm,
to take that step. We want to, me and people at these organizations want to empower gun owners, future gun owners, Americans in general, with ways to support themselves before the government has to step in and red flag you and all these different things that we dislike.
mm,
You take, control the situation. This is your journey. This is your battle. You're the hero in your own story. Let's
yeah.
not give that power away. Um,
You've hit on an important thing there. So there have been some recent headlines about gun owners shooting people for a real nonsense. I mean, like, so
Recently,
I
yeah.
drive into your driveway and you shoot me just like randomly, or
Yeah,
I
that
ring
doesn't
your,
just happen.
yeah, great. I mean, this in the last, what, 2, 3 weeks,
Hmm.
like four different incidents. And so if I mention that to say, in terms of people taking control of the narrative about 2A and moderating gun ownership, people who are reckless about how they use firearms and the circumstances under which they use lethal force as an option for conflict resolution or just like, I don't know, like the gate to your driveway, are really going to be the people who are going to screw 2A up. And what I mean by that is it feeds into the narrative that not only are there a lot of guns, but there are a lot of people who own them who shouldn't, because they are unhinged and they are more than eager to use violence and guns as a mechanism to demonstrate their emotional dysregulation, their racial biases, their mental health issues, whatever the case may be. So we have to be really, really thoughtful about that. And the services that you just mentioned are great. I hadn't heard of those. I do love Mental Health America. It's a free training that's offered to people. They probably have one in nearby, if not in your zip code, and it teaches people about how to recognize the signs of mental unwellness and provides you with some resources, intervention strategies for yourself and others. I think it's relevant in general, not just for the 2A conversation, but in general, because there's so much about our society that is not about health and well-being, and to the extent that it needs to be.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, like, if you look at even, you have these organizations like Moms Demand Action and Every Town for Gun Safety, who I like to say, like, hey, you know, I feel like there's at least somebody there in those organizations who's really coming at this from a good place, maybe a fearful place, like they're scared of guns and they have seen carnage and, you know, hardships, and they really just don't want anybody else to deal with it, so they're going to take yours. You know, the conclusion is always like, and now you can't have it. Like,
Right.
oh,
Right.
okay, cool. Well, unfortunately, you're gonna have to come get it because I'm not gonna just give it to you. And please don't come get it because you're putting me in a weird spot now. You know, like I don't have to deal with you like that. We
You
could
know,
be friends.
we could be friends, right? You know what? It's interesting that you say that, because people, what is it? I think it's, was it Charlton Heston maybe who said "out of my cold hands" or
Cold
whatever?
dead hands. Yeah.
Yeah. But here's the thing: you look at some of the more liberal states, of the blue states, if you
Hmm.
will, and the ways that they're changing what is considered a legal firearm
Oh
in the
yeah.
state. And you can either register that weapon, or you have to surrender it, or if they catch you with there's fines and or other jail time. So they're not coming to take it.
Right.
They're making sure they know you have it. They're implementing laws where if for any reason you are diagnosed as having PTSD or some other things, they can come get your weapon, and it's registered now,
Hmm.
and or you're going to give it to them because you don't want to register it, and or you don't want to hold it legally, so illegally. So
Yeah. You know, it's interesting how much data is actually out there. I mean, even down to social media algorithms being able to detect if there's a gun in the video. Because a bunch of
wow.
my stuff gets flagged, and I hate it because I'm like, I'm trying to build something cool here, guys, and y'all keep flagging my videos for having
Mm,
simulated violence. I'm like, simulated violence? Like, what are you talking about? I'm one of the
a
least
weapon.
violent people you know, and you know it. So, you know, that said, you're correct. I was actually, when the pistol brace ban was first being submitted, like a year and a half ago. It's like a national ban against AR platforms having
Mm,
short barrels and a quote unquote pistol brace, which is not the same as a stock. It's a little bit different, but it's,
mm,
somebody might consider it a loophole, and somebody did, and they tried to close it by basically saying that if you are in possession of one of these after a certain date, you are eligible for 10 years in prison, and I think like a $10,000 fine or something like that. Which, you know, I'd rather pay you 10 grand than go away for 10,000, 10 years.
right.
But it's also the same penalty as if you owned a suppressor
Hmm.
without government permission, which suppressors are not, don't make the gun more dangerous per se. Um, I'm sure somebody can do something to make their crime a little bit more um, low key, but you know,
Right.
with crime, anything's possible. Like, let's not pretend like the key
Criminals
word
are
here isn't crime. You know, with crime, we can do whatever we want. You want to become a millionaire? Crime. You know?
Mm,
So,
mm,
point being is, oh, you want to make your rifle full auto? Well, that's a crime, and it's the same penalty as owning something that a year and a half ago was perfectly legal for me to own. Like, perfectly fine. You could go to any gun store, file a background check, pay them whatever money they ask for, and you could
Mm.
leave and you'd be straight. You're fine. No one could tell you anything.
Right.
Black, white, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Mm.
But now, after, I don't know, one or two incidents that happened where somebody brought two rifles. One was a full rifle and one was a rifle with a pistol brace. And the ATF's like, well, here's our opportunity. And it's almost like, dang, was that like a false flag operation or was this just a coincidence?
Right. Yeah,
I don't
you
want to
have.
be conspiratorial, but you know.
I think we know enough about how our history has worked that conspiracies are rampant, and conspiracy theorists are just fortune tellers sometimes.
Pretty
Yeah, you mentioned
much.
a term that I'm not familiar with, filato.
Full auto. Yeah, so if a fully automatic, say like an actual assault rifle from the military, they have 3 stages: safe, single shot, or you know, what is the term? Basically, not safe, and then full auto is the third stage in that. And civilian weapons, if you don't have certain licenses that only cost like $2,500, if you go and get that specific license that basically puts you on a list and says like, hey, this person is able to, because we gave him permission, he's able to manufacture machine guns in his home, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, like people think like, oh yeah, machine guns aren't legal. They are if you pay the government money. Like almost anything's legal if you pay for it, you know.
Gee.
Like, and so like all these things are troublesome to me. And we, talking about how it connects to, American history, the Black experience, where we are today. I found it intriguing that as more Black people decided, like, hey, I'm going to take this firearm thing seriously. I think I should get an AR because, I don't know, with as much violence and chaos as in the streets, and after the election, there was a lot. I don't know if there's more, but there's more reporting of racist individuals doing these acts. Right, hate crimes, or even the just weird things where they're drawing like Nazi symbols here and there and everywhere, and it's like, maybe I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna be a victim, but I'm gonna make sure I'm not. I'm gonna make sure I'm prepared. I'm gonna make sure I'm trained, and that's one thing I would say. And I'm going on and on. If you own a
No, I
gun, get some training, please. I'm like, whoever's listening, like I have a lot of training under my belt just because of who I am and what I do, and some of the volunteer security work that I've done, and being on different teams. My training is not enough for me to be extremely confident in just, people say owning a gun shouldn't be comfortable. It should be comforting. No, carrying a gun is not comforting. Your skill that you have behind it, that's the comforting thing. And I'm never comfortable with it.
That's a
So
whole tweet. That's a whole bumper sticker. I love, 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 love what you said there. That's
thank you.
powerful. No, it is. Seriously, please put that somewhere to document it so that it
I'll
can be
clip it.
shared.
Somebody,
um,
somebody ought to clip it. Somebody clip that. Thanks, guys.
as you were speaking about preparedness, it made me think about the three sisters, the survival
Survival
sisters.
Sisters. Yeah, I love those
Yeah,
girls, and
love
they're
that.
expanding their team. Yeah, they're expanding their
Yeah,
team.
they're really growing. I think I joined. They have something I joined and paid
Yeah,
something to like support them. But training our children about firearm ownership and again management, taking it apart, making sure it's clean, making sure don't play with it, like all the things that we need to teach about it is really important as well. And then shooting, like you say, on a regular basis. One of the things I would like to do more of is training in general, but also training in the live sense. So the movement as you're shooting, like scenario training.
yeah, that's hard stuff. Like it's super immersive.
It looks like it. And it's such a way to, if you're in a real situation, unless you got the jump on somebody trying to break into your house or whatever, in a real situation, there's so much awareness that one has to have, and so much self management of your stress response systems, your breathing, all the things, your surroundings, like all of it, just to make sure that you're in the situation and managing it in the proper way. But also if some stuff stuff pops off, and you have to actually use 2A in the sense that it was intended, not just for your protection of your house, but also like you're out in the community. That kind of like people ain't gonna. I would say the average person would need that kind of training to be able to really manage the situation well.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are people, at least one guy that I know of, who's not a proponent of training. Like, I'm like,
Hmm.
what's wrong with you? Because there have been so many self-defensive incidents of self-defense where the person's just kind of been to the range once or twice or three times and they were able to successfully defend themselves, kind of like a luck thing. I'm like, I don't want to rely on luck. There's a lot riding. Like, I've got two small children, I've got a wife, I've got loved ones, I've got people in this community that I do not want to hurt. I want to make sure that if my aim is true and
Right.
every trigger press leads to a very predictable outcome. That said, you know, sometimes life is not as predictable as it is. And I've been through some of those trainings where it's, real simulation type stuff. And I know that as I'm kind of peeking around a doorway, because I know where this active shooter is, and I'm going around the doorway and I see the guy and I press the trigger and it's not even racked. Like, the round is not chambered. And I'm like, okay, well, I was told that this round was chambered just because of how the scenario was set up. So instinctually, I tap rack, and that's type one malfunction clearance, and simple enough. And then we got back to work and we did what we had to do, and we won the scenario. But there is so much more to it, and I would highly recommend, like, if you can take to you or to anybody else, like in your city, or even if you got to travel a state over to, even if it's your first time ever, take a course that kind of gets you into the basics, and then the next course should kind of take you to the next phase of the basics, and then as soon as you can kind of go into like real like simulation type stuff where we got blue guns, and there's actually facilities, I think in Florida, WAFT I believe has a great facility where you can get simunition rounds, and somebody's messing with your car and it's like, oh, is this a bad guy? No. Okay, well, you can't just pull a gun on because someone looks suspicious. Suspicious isn't a felony, and if you shoot somebody for being suspicious, you're going to jail. Hopefully.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. we've seen weird stuff happen. That
Perfect.
said, like you said, I highly recommend, just because you actually do get tunnel vision, like really bad. Like, if there's dead bodies on the ground or somebody's on the ground, you might not see that gun laying there
Mm,
from the guy who was shooting up the place, or from the guy who's maybe playing dead. And now that you walked past him looking for
right.
whatever was going on, you're going to die. So,
Yeah.
I
Yeah, not
know
to
what's
even
going
like
on.
no, it's good because it's really important. People think buying a gun is and getting a license to carry is the only thing, but if you're carrying a deadly weapon on your hip, you really do need to be situationally aware.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you need to be aware of yourself and how you function under stressful situations, which is why I always tell people, like, the reason you do like training is exposure therapy. So I'm pulling forth my
Yeah.
therapy here. It's exposure therapy because you just do not know how that adrenaline hit and how the activation of your stress response system is going to make you show up. And you might think you're Dirty Harry, but you might end up in a pool crying because you're just overwhelmed, or paralyzed, right? Frozen, because you're overwhelmed. So the reason you do the
Yeah.
training, and I'm talking about this from a theoretical perspective, but the reason you do the training is so that it's when you're in the real situation, it's not the first time you've been in a situation like it.
Yeah. So I've trained at some point in the last few months and years. I've trained with police and SWAT guys who they'll let you
Wow.
know, like, code brown is a thing,
Mm,
as in, even when they're chasing bad guys, sometimes they'll find a bad guy and they'll apprehend the bad guy, and they'll have to let somebody know, like, hey, listen, like, this guy, he pooped his shorts, like, it's for real.
ah,
Like, your bodily responses can happen depending on how you react to fear and
mm,
adrenaline. Sometimes your body goes into dump mode and just says, lose
right,
weight and we're going to go,
right. Yeah.
Sometimes, depending on, how you react to fear and whatnot, like, your limbs can go cold and freeze up and feel real sluggish. And that nightmare of you're running for your life and everything's real slow, like, that'll happen in real life. So expose yourself to as much as possible. Not to say like you're overtraining and becoming some, tactical SWAT guy. That's not what this is about. I'm just saying like when it comes time to defend your life, be proficient. And especially if you're a black dude, you're a black lady, African American in this country, descendant of slavery, like this is more than you're right. In fact, I would say more than anybody else, you need to be training to become proficient, understand the laws around this place. Because there's a lot of people who get into violent encounters and they don't really understand, and they're on the internet and they're like, "Oh, I would have did this," and then I'm like, don't say that,
Right.
don't
I'm
say
sure.
that.
Yeah.
And maybe in your state that's cool, but according to Texas state law, you cannot
Mm,
do that. And I live in Texas,
mm,
so like
gotcha. Yeah,
so.
the home of 2A, so to speak.
It seems like it, but but funny enough, a couple of years back, I moved from Virginia. We were up in school, university in Virginia, and they had better open carry, concealed carry laws, and at least in my city that I was in, a cheaper license to carry than here in where I live now in Texas. At the time, now you don't need any of that. You can just pick
Yeah.
up a gun and go. Though I highly
Right.
recommend that if you have not been exposed to training, get some training because you might blow your hand off. There's a lot of people, and there's a lot of charlatans on the internet who are training people and they don't know what they're talking about. Vet your instructor. If you're not familiar with a guy, DM, ask like, hey, who have you trained with? Who do you know? And
Mhm.
check that list. We've talked about this on previous episodes, but I highly recommend, you specifically, Denise, if you need somebody to work with and you're like, well, who should I train with? Let's have a conversation because,
Sounds good.
yeah,
Yeah. When I did my CHL stuff, I did it in, well, when I did my CHL stuff, my trainer was an FBI guy.
yeah, nice. Because
Yeah.
you would think that he's up to date with all the latest information. Though it is weird that sometimes you run into guys who they've been out of the game for like 10 years and they're kind of what they become like a FUD, which is basically old school Elmer Fudd, like only shotguns for home defense and no technology on your guns because technology fails. And if you got a flashlight, you need to carry it like this away from your body. And it's like maybe I don't know, but there's a lot of new theories and new ideas on self-defense. And really quick, guys, we're about to wrap up, so if you guys have questions or comments or ideas, um, shoot them in the comment section. I think you do need to be a subscriber to shoot questions, so if you need to do that, that's cool. If you don't want to do that, that's fine as well. But we want to make sure that if you have thoughts or questions that Denise can get to them, or even if it's for me, that's fine too. But you can always shoot me a DM on Instagram if you have a question for me. Not that big a deal. And like the stream is like a couple of you watching, not that many likes. So just let's do that so more people can understand what we're talking about and get some knowledge. So Denise, was there? I'm looking at our notes from when we last talked. Was there anything that you're just like, shoot, I really want to talk about this before I kind of ask you some of my last questions?
Yeah, so I'm gonna do a couple things. I'm gonna answer a question you posed and
Mm-hmm.
let people know that they can reach me and follow me on Twitter at P Denise Long. So P Denise Long. Um, One of the things I would like to see from the political perspective, from a political commentary perspective, is to see multi generational Black Americans really lean into our legacy in this nation. And I don't mean that just in an affinity sense, like we know who we are, we know our history as a people, and we love it. What I mean also is from a political perspective and from a power perspective. I'm really calling Black Americans into the idea that this is your home, this is your country, and there is no replacement of you, no matter. And what I mean by that is no matter how many Black looking people migrate to America, they will never be multi-generational Black Americans in the Black American descendant of slave Negro sense of the word. And so the only other Negroes, freedmen, who come to be are the ones that we birth, right? And so there are ways that people migrate here, see the beauty of what has been created, that our forebears and we, I'm 50, have been a part of creating, And there's ways that we've been fatigued by what the nation has put us through, and there's a way that we are sick of our white American countrymen showing up in some of the ways that they do, ignorant of our history and or contemptuous toward us is how we perceive them. I need us to take ownership of the narrative. I need us to be in positions of power. I need us to reclaim all of our Americanness, all of those constitutional amendments, all of those Bill of Rights, and all of the legislation that has been put on the books for our people, and to be selfish and vigilant and guarded about making sure that all of the stuff that we created benefits us without us ever feeling that we need to apologize to anybody else because they are ambitious and want to have a similar level of importance that we have, when history just doesn't allow them to do that. So be self-interested, claim America, because it is absolutely yours.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because so often, even in the black to a black gun space, you have, and even when it comes to like conversations of religion, like there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, America kind of sucks. I don't even know I'm here. Really, I'm only here because I can't afford to move to Tanzania
Mhm.
or
Right.
Liberia or something like that.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, if it sucks so bad, I'm not saying go back to Africa. I would never say that to somebody like that. That's just disrespectful. But
Mhm.
like, I don't know how to help you. Like, is this
Mhm.
not your country? Like we talk about, oh, we built this place. I mean, we did for. I mean, if you really want to talk about that, we were instrumental in the economic success of America, the beautiful. If you refer to America as such, um,
Mhm.
that said, there's so many people who are like, well, yeah, Second Amendment, that's a white people thing. Second Amendment was created to so that slave catchers could, you know, hunt down and stop insurrections. I'm like, well, you should definitely get some guns then, huh? If you really are concerned about these things.
What's that note about a good guy, right? The best way for a
Right,
good guy, yeah,
right.
lead
Good guy with a gun, yeah. All
for
these different things. But I appreciate what she said, which is like to embrace it and to really understand. And I think it's we are pushing away people who I think would have the conversation with us. You know, when I say pushing away people, I think there are certain people in conservative circles who would love to sit down and have a conversation. When I say love, some, not all,
mm,
some people would love to sit down and have a conversation, except that you basically said you hate America and you think she's awful and there's no redeeming value in America. And you know, I'm not here to tell you that there is or there isn't, but I think you should at least look for it. You know what I mean?
mm.
So,
I would say that, and I appreciate your saying that. I think that there is no redeeming value is what we in DEIA say is battle fatigue. It is the unrelenting, we Negroes are always fighting for our recognition of our humanity and delivery on the implementation of the Constitution for us, and all the legislation and other acts that had to happen for us to be not just seen as equal, but also to get the equity that we had been denied all those generations. Because there is no equality without delivering the equity that we've been denied. You can't dig a ditch for 250 years, put us in it, tie our hands behind our back, and then tell us to go compete with everybody else that you've given so much to and haven't placed the same burdens on. You can't call that equal just because you like untied my hands while you didn't put me in a ditch. Like that makes no sense. So I think part of that is battle fatigue. And that is why people need to not just look for the redeeming value, but create it, enforce, do everything that you can within your power and realize what that power is to fully implement and enforce all of the legacy, all of the legislation, all of the amendments that were designed for our people, and be unapologetic about hobbling anyone who's looking to take our country back, uh, and be regressive in their rhetoric and their actions. So yeah.
you know, actually, I do want to talk about one more thing before we wrap up, if that's okay. I know we don't
Yeah.
have all the
No.
time in the world, but in at least in our previous conversations, you've mentioned that you know you're for law and order, although
Mm,
you know it's sometimes considered like a Trumpian, and if Trump is racist, that's a racist thing to say. What are you against blacks? Like, what's wrong with you? You know, like that's people might say something like that. But you're also for accountability and law enforcement. How are you for law and order if you're also for accountability and law enforcement? Because those this zeitgeist ideas
Right.
seem like they're, you know, counter, in the sense that it seems like a lot of people, they believe that if, you know, a police officer wants to plant drugs on you, they can, you know, you know, if it's for the sake of making sure the community is, you know, safer from those you know, baboons or whatever you want to, you know, try to say
Oh,
to justify
yeah.
your internalized racism or something.
Super predators, right? So
Right. Jeez, she went there.
yeah, so we cannot have law enforcement that is criminal in its conduct and behavior and think we have law and order. Law and order applies to every stakeholder, including the enforcers of the laws, including the writers of the laws. And so we have to have responsibility and accountability in order for us to have every stakeholder be adhering to law and order. Planting drugs on someone is not law and order, that's criminal. Abusing the inmates who are in your jail and or prison is not law and order, that's criminal. It's lacking accountability, it's lacking decency, it is inhumane. People seem to think that punishment is the only solution, and dehumanizing people who commit crimes is the only solution. They deserve it. That's why people can go to jail and be eaten alive by bugs in a jail cell because we forget about them and we dehumanize them. And in so many ways, our law enforcement and incarceration apparatus hardens people, traumatizes people when they go in and they come out worse, right? They give back to the community people who are not rehabilitated from whatever happened to them, nor habilitated, learning new skills. So I don't see any contradiction between law and order and responsibility and accountability and accountability. As a matter of fact, I think the four elements there have to be married together in order for law and order to exist, and also for people to be willing to respect law enforcement and the structure and writing of laws in the first place.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of people have said, and you know, the different circles that I bounce around in, you know, you see conversations basically like ACAB referring to just the institution of law enforcement as being some inherently evil and racist thing. When you say inherently, you might go all the way back to, let's say, the inception of slavery and the slave catchers, and that's where the law enforcement units kind of came from, and different things like that. And it's like, well, is that the only place that law enforcement was ever? You know, you go back to even the Roman centurions and the military units. It's like, is that a one-to-one? Is that apples to apples? Maybe not. Like,
Mm.
and how? And I say that to say, like, how do you reconcile some of these discussions, and maybe misguided discussions even in pro-black circles, considering that he's like, hey, you know, I'm pro-black, yeah, I'm kind of Republican-ish depending on the day. um, like, how do you reconcile that with yourself, saying like, hey, you know, the institution of, you know, policing has been weaponized tremendously. Like the
Mhm.
FBI has literally assassinated um, black people for being black and too loud about it. Like, how do you reconcile that and even be okay with the idea of saying law and order? Because somebody might say, well, that's a walking contradiction.
Yeah. Well, I speak to it as law and order and responsibility plus responsibility and accountability. So I marry them in the rhetoric. And I think to your point about the history, if you will, of sheriffs and deputies and all of those things being anchored in catching the enslaved people and punishing them and some other things. We can accept the reality of that, acknowledge the reality of that, acknowledge the problems of that, and still at the same time recognize that law enforcement is not going to go away, nor should we want it to. What we should want it to do is be accountable and responsible and be subject to the same criminal, civil conduct related boundaries of the people that they are supposed to be protecting, but are enforcing laws upon and surveilling. So I think sometimes people feel like it has to be one thing or the other. Like I can't be pro black and be for public safety, right? And whether that
Mhm.
public safety has on a blue uniform and is an operative of the state, or if that public safety comes through community based initiatives that come out of surveilling by the community themselves, right? Um, I am for public safety, and I do believe that law enforcement, as a part of the government apparatus, has a place there. It is about the quality of that, the honor of them actually showing up and behaving in a way that is honorable in order for people to feel inclined to even collaborate with, no less submit, right, to their presence. I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, I think you did a great job of clearing that up. More or less saying, according to what I heard, like, hey, law enforcement, yes, it may have a dark and dirty history, but their ability to show up every day and kind of earn the title of a community
privilege.
protector, yeah, pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's the idea that you can just show up on somebody's block, or in somebody's neighborhoods, show up to somebody's home, and with the power of the state compel them to do whatever is considered a lawful order. That's a big deal. And
It's
if you
a
can't handle that, like, you need to go. You need to either never do this job again,
right.
or be somewhere where you can think about your actions. Usually that's like a jail cell or something like that.
People need to be in jail. I ain't opposed to it.
Yeah.
Particularly when you have sworn a duty to the Constitution. To your point, you have been conferred enormous power by the state to affect the lives of citizens. And if any time you see yourself as separate and apart from those citizens, you are likely a danger to those very people. And so there are ways that entire units of law enforcement probably need to be done away with and started over for real, because they are so corrupt. I have several really good friends who are law enforcement police officers, troopers, military people, and the like. And each one of them notes the importance of leadership in determining the culture of the units that they have been in. And so we have to be able to not be so enamored by the concept of the person's wearing the blue, that they're sacred and off limits. We have to really be willing to say, you are unfit for this job, given the power that you have and your inability to wield it with discretion, with diligence, and with humanity. Because we can't just have you out here shooting people up because you mad, or beating the crap out of people because they ran because they scared of you.
No, you're absolutely correct. And like you said, it is a privilege to work in that position. And we see instances even now where, I guess, in Oklahoma there was some sheriff who was talking to some other community members about even
Yeah.
like assassinating a reporter or something like that. And it's like, whoa, like, where are you going? You tell me you're an outlier. And then you see like different instances where sheriffs are doing this and that, and they're getting involved in the political game of moving immigrants around and dealing with homeless problems. And it's like, it sounds like the police have way too much on their plate to really be doing stuff. And I don't want to get into the idea of refund and defund and reallocate. That's not a conversation we can have right now, but maybe in the future we can come back and have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we've I see we got people watching, and thank you guys so much for sticking with us this long. We are going to sign out. Denise, where can people find you? I know you shared your Twitter handle. Could you share it one more time for those who are maybe just hopping in, and where else
Yeah,
people can look at your work?
absolutely. So Twitter is at P Denise Long. So that's my first initial, middle name, last, P Denise Long. I write random thoughts about a variety of things, but generally centered on diversity, equity, inclusion in an applied sense. I write on Medium. That's PamelaDeniseLong.medium.com. I do have a Substack that I am migrating over to. That's PamelaDeniseLong.substack.com. And then you can find some of my political writings on Newsweek. If you go to Newsweek.com or Google me or whatever, Pamela Denise Long Newsweek, you'll see my author's page and the things that I've written about there, from diversity, equity, inclusion, and actually implementing it, to voting rights and voter ID laws, to immigration, to abortion, to a variety of topics.
And thank you so much, Denise, for coming on this show and really just sharing your heart on so many different topics. And to you, the listener, thank you guys for tuning in. I see there's quite a few of you tuning in live. If you're on the podcast side, make sure you join us live. We've been doing them on Sundays. We might move it around, but follow me on social media just to kind of see when we're actually going to be going live, whether that's on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube community tab, or wherever I might be. It's always posted somewhere in some link tree thing. Yeah, it's all over the place. That said, guys, thank you so much. My name is Aaron. You've been listening to Costly Conversations, a podcast where we talk about real life issues, but of course, in the context, or we contextualize the Second Amendment through these conversations. And of course, until next time, keep it costly.